I'm Elliot Raben. Have a good night, everyone. Phew. That was a good show, you guys. Michelle, thank you for being here. I'll see you out. Great show, you two. When I come back, we'll discuss plans for season 10?
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome.
Are you ready for another 11 weeks of this?
Meh, are you?
No, to be completely honest with you, I've been here the whole season, and he's kind of a dick.
Yeah, right? Expecting us to be here so late, especially after a long day at work.
Yeah, I have to drive all the way in from Scarborough.
At least you have a car. I have to take the TTC and then an Uber.
Well, while we're talking about him, the Raben Report, what a stupid name for a show. All he does is the behind-the-scenes stuff, so we're the real star of the show.
Yeah, right? All your Chilean friends watch it because of you. All my Venezuelan friends watch it because of me.
Creo que es hora de que hablemos con él.
Sí, es hora de que nos hagamos cargo.
What?
We need to talk.
Buenas noches y bienvenidos al programa de Dos Latinas con Cristina y Ana.
¡Hola a todos!
Comencemos el show. En Noticias Latinas, Jennifer López está calentando las listas una vez más. Su nuevo éxito Te Gusté con Bad Bunny ha alcanzado las mayores listas de Billboard. Es la primera vez que estos dos artistas...
That's it. No more horror movies before bed.
No bad dreams here, because the Raben Report is back for one final season. Tune in to Facebook Live Tuesday, March 16th at 7 p.m. for the season 10 premiere. One great host, 2 strong Latinas, and 11 brand new episodes. Don't miss the final season of the Raben Report starting next Tuesday on Facebook Live.
¡Qué gran espectáculo!
Estoy de acuerdo.
¿Podemos hablar inglés ahora?
¡No!
The opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of our sponsors and are only those of the individual commentators. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening and welcome to the Raben Report's Season 10 premiere. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, and with me for the first time this season is my incredible panel, Christina and Anna. How are you both?
Great, and so excited to be back.
I am very excited to be back as well. People want to know. The people want to know. What have you guys been up to during this time? Christina, let's start with you.
I am now a proud mother of a puppy.
Oh, okay. I was a little bit
Yep.
concerned for a moment.
No, I did not get pregnant and have a child within the past 2 months, but I do
I sure
have
hope not.
I do have a fur baby now. His name is Kobe, and he's the best thing in the world.
Well, congratulations. I today actually got a follow from Kobe. So
Yes.
he's so grown up. He's already
Yeah.
got an Instagram account.
Yeah, he's very tech savvy. Yeah.
That's awesome to hear. Anna, what have you been up to?
I have been out to, well, actually a lot of things lately that I cannot mention in the show because there's a lot of liability.
What kind of what kind of illegal activities have you been a part of? The door's over there. Just
Exactly.
saying.
That's why I cannot talk about them.
Okay.
I was just expecting Christina to say the hola a todos again. That would have been the greatest start of the day.
Well, I was expecting a little more than you saying that you're involved with illegal activities, but that's what you get for Anna Riso. But yes, we are back for season 10, the final season. Many people have asked me, why is this the final season? And I can't really put it into words why, but it feels like the right time. It just feels like the time to end it. For the longest time, I had thought that season 8 would be the final season, but when the pandemic shut us down unexpectedly, I knew that wasn't a fair way to go out, both to the team and to our incredible viewers. Fun fact, today I got a notification that exactly a year ago today, we posted our document that said that we're on hiatus. And look where we are a year later. So that's pretty incredible. But here we are with season 9 having been completed, fully self-funded and produced. That was the major hurdle. Season 10, we're back, and I really want to enjoy this season as much as I can. So to those of you watching, thank you, and I hope you'll watch the entire season as we have so much in store for you, starting tonight with our season 10 premiere and our season 10 finale that you do not want to miss. Well, let's get into it. Tonight we're going to skip our weekly update segment because we want to dedicate the whole show to our discussion with our special guest. Our first guest of season 10 is someone who made major headlines by going against his own party and his own leader, Premier Doug Ford. With us today is MPP for York Centre, Raben Babar. How are you, Raben?
I'm good. Good to be here.
We are so excited to have you. We're going to get into who you are and why you made your now well-known decisions shortly. But first, let's get into our main topic, which is... Can you tell it's a season premiere? Oh, you're laughing. You're enjoying this. Okay. Well, this is great so far. Loving the fact that this is happening. But it's okay. It's okay. Here we are. Okay. As I started the last episode on coronavirus, thank God we're in York Region. You know why? Because York Region is in the red zone, unlike Toronto that is in the gray zone. What that means is that gatherings of up to 5 people are permitted indoors, hence our ability to bring you this show. What's important to note is that the entire province of Ontario had been in another state of emergency order and stay-at-home order between January and February. Don't ask me what the difference is because I will not answer that. Now, the lockdowns weren't as strict as last March, but they weren't far off the mark. Tonight, we're bringing you a third episode about the coronavirus because so much has changed between last year, the start of the pandemic, and September, the second episode in the series. While we focused on the virus and spread in previous shows, today we'll be focusing on the efficacy of lockdowns and the vaccines. Joining us this episode once again is MPP Raben Babar, who made headlines when he wrote a letter to Premier Doug Ford demanding that the lockdowns be lifted. He cited statistics on economic impacts, but more importantly, the health risks that came with the isolation. Tonight we dive deep into why Raben made that decision that actually got him kicked out of the party, making him an independent, and what he and our panel have to say about the situation. Tonight, once again, nothing will be left off the table. As a reminder, we are live on Facebook, so make sure to comment on our feed to have your thoughts read live on air. Have questions for Raben? Send them in the comments. So, Raben, let's start with you. Who are you? What's your background? And, of course, why did you write that now famous, infamous, however you want to call it, letter?
I'm having a little bit of time to get adjusted to the show, and so now I understand that my intro needs to change a little.
Oh.
So, my name is Raben Baber. I have blue eyes, and I like long walks on the beach. But more importantly, I'm an immigrant to Canada. I was born in the Soviet Union. We moved to Israel when I was 8. I came to Canada when I was 15 to Shepherd and Bathurst, directly to the area I now represent. And I'm Exhibit A for Canadian Opportunity. I went to York University, Western Law School. I articled and started practicing on Bay Street in bankruptcy and commercial litigation. And a couple of years later, I went on my own, and thankfully have been very, very blessed. Joined a small partnership and practiced for 12 years prior to my election, primarily in insurance and commercial litigation.
Wow, so you've got a serious portfolio under your belt, right? How do you compare life here in Canada compared to, again, the Soviet Union that you left?
Sure. In fact, that's a question I get quite often as to whether I'm seeing any similarities between what's transpiring now and back in the Soviet Union. Look, I left when it was still a communist state. I was almost 9, and I remember very vividly, clearly, that there was a state, there was a narrative, there was fear, there was definitely anti-Semitism. There was censorship in the sense that I was warned by my parents that I should not be discussing certain topics at school. I remember the fostering of love towards the supposed motherland and its leadership. And I remember my parents yearning for freedom that we were blessed to realize in '89 when we moved to Israel. I then moved to Israel. Also a very interesting place to live. First time I've enjoyed democracy. I remember we came to Tel Aviv and I smelled the trees and the Mediterranean Sea, and I tasted Coca-Cola. And I thought that was just magnificent. And that taste of Coca-Cola sort of stayed with me as this taste of freedom. I have a similar story about me coming to Toronto and my Canadian immigration story. 8 weeks after I came to Toronto, the Toronto Raptors basketball team had its inaugural game at the Skydome, and I was at the first ever preseason Toronto Raptors basketball game. I was in Toronto for 8 weeks, and here I am at an NBA game, and I saw Patrick Ewing jump for like the initial tip-off, and I was thrilled. And so I associate the Raptors with my coming to Canada story, and I've been a huge fan ever since.
Wow. So you must have been very excited when the Raptors won last year, right?
Absolutely. Look, I think the Raptors have always found a way to overperform, I would say, in the last 6-7 years. Coaching is definitely a huge factor, but I like to attribute it to the home crowd, right? It's the crowd, it's all the drinks we consume and all the cheers, but most importantly, I think the Raptors actually helped Toronto become a world-class city. There's so much involved in this culture, in this entertainment venue, and so much of it feeds. And I wish we didn't have to jump to the pandemic already, but that's how I know that the pandemic is going to be over for me fully. Is I'm going to come back to the Air Canada Centre, and I'm going to go down to the seats. I'm going to have a drink in my hand, and the team's going to come out. Arena's going to be packed, and it will probably be one of the happier moments I've had in a long time. And I wish that for your listeners as well. I'm sure a lot of them are looking forward to that.
Well, I mean, you're right. Everyone is looking forward to the pandemic being over. But let's talk about a moment in your life that I don't think was as pleasant for you, which was when you wrote the letter to Premier Doug Ford demanding that he lift the lockdowns, which, as everyone knows, actually he kicked you out of the party. And I want to know, why did you write that letter?
So in the weeks leading to the letter and in the months leading to the letter, I've heard from hundreds, if not thousands, of constituents with respect to some of the adverse effects of the lockdown. And I felt that there was an absence of conversation about the toll of the lockdown. And I was of the view that it's important that we weigh the cost of mitigation, of restrictions, and that we factor the overall effects of the lockdown into this healthcare equation, and that we balance the risk of COVID at large, which can be a very dangerous infection, against the unintended consequences of the lockdown. Right? We're in politics. In politics, just like in medicine, you should weigh the consequences of your decision. And I suggested to the Premier that there is a possibility that the cure may be killing the patient. And that is something that we need to focus our attention to and just have a conversation that was absent at the time.
So did you speak to the Premier about this feeling before you posted the letter?
Yes. There's an article in iPolitics that the Premier graced me, Raben MPP specifically, with more meetings than any other MPP before the pandemic. I've spoken to the Premier routinely, and in fairness, I spoke to him quite a bit during the pandemic. There's no secret among my colleagues and within government at large that my views were known. You contain those views within the government. But at a certain point in early to mid-January, I decided that the current path was unsustainable. I had a series of a couple of events in the week leading to my letter. So,
what were the events?
So my letter was on a Friday, January 15th. I think on the Saturday before that, I got a call from a good constituent who said, Roman, I employ a husband and wife couple. And last weekend, the wife attempted to take her own life, a mother of 5. And thankfully, she failed. He gave me a letter to deliver to Minister MacLeod, who oversees the industry that he's in, to call attention to what this woman was feeling. Then on the Monday, I got a call from another constituent who said, my mom's heart surgery was canceled today by one of the Toronto hospitals. It was a valve replacement surgery. And he said to me, Roman, but I know that the hospital had beds. They told us they have beds, but they have to keep them reserved. And they canceled my mom's surgery. And then I had a discussion later on in the week with public health. And I felt that the responses I was getting from public health led me to believe that there is a possibility that we will not be exiting this situation, or at least the viability of the proposed exit is in question. And at that point, I decided that I have to speak out in order to get the conversation started. And I'm very, very pleased, in my view, that the conversation has started on the Friday and on the weekend subsequent to my letter.
Well, you did. I have your letter in front of me, and you did cite all of these things that you mentioned. That cancer screenings are back at 60%, with oncologists fearing a tsunami of cancer. Sick Kids is calling the increase of eating disorders in young people an unprecedented crisis, and you write about the fact that suicides have gone up. Now, did you expect to be taken out of the party by posting this letter? I mean, you obviously had to have considered the consequences of posting it, right?
I anticipated that there would be some sort of punishment, that there would be repercussions. I can't speak to specifically whether I believe that I was going to be removed from caucus. On the day of, now that I think back to the day, I learned at approximately 9 o'clock in the morning by text message that I was expelled from caucus.
A text message?
A text message.
Wow.
Not even an email.
Not usually. Wow.
That's okay.
You think a breakup is bad. You got a text message that you were out of caucus.
I did. And
Wow.
but that was at approximately 9 a.m. And I think I had the Agar show on Newstalk 1010 about 10 minutes later. And that was one of my first major interviews of the day. And with so much adrenaline, with everything that was going on, I didn't really think about that. And I went through the day as if nothing really much happened. I slept it off. Woke up the next morning and started working to lift the lockdown. And frankly, have been really overjoyed and relieved by the amount of outpouring and kindness and support that so many people have shown me.
Mm-hmm.
And were able to sustain me through what was a difficult period, prevented my cancellation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Cancel culture. We had an
And,
episode on that.
And well, I know if I'm on the Raben report, then I haven't been canceled.
Of course.
Right?
Well,
So
yeah, people have tried to cancel us many times,
Exactly.
but here we are. But yeah, no, that's the thing. We whether, I mean, I don't take a side, but whether we agree with someone or not is not the point. It's to have the discussion. So again, we're thankful that you're here. But I'm here to press everybody. So I'm here to press you on your facts. I'm here to press the both of you ladies on your facts. Dos Latinas. And, so don't you feel, though, that you could have done more as a member of the PC party rather than posting that letter?
Elliot, I worked very, very hard to steer the party and the government in a different direction. I have a pretty good research team with me. I read quite a bit. I started speaking about the toll of mitigation and, in fact, our general direction as early as mid-May.
Okay.
In mid-May, a couple of things happened. So first of all, we started understanding that the bulk of the problem, and specifically the fatalities, are largely limited to group homes, to congregate settings. More than 80% of folks that tragically passed away from the virus live in a congregate home facility, mostly long-term care.
Yep.
And I felt that is a very important medical distinction to make, right? And I felt that the narrative proposed or perpetuated by public health is not necessarily fair, right? We do basic triage when we look at an issue, right? You come into the hospital, doctor looks at you and says, okay, who are you? What are you? It's an important inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that when it comes to those that are regretfully affected by COVID, we just stopped doing that for some reason. The second thing, and so I sought a differentiation, which in and of itself would have potentially suggested change of strategy, right? Could we not perhaps focus our protection on folks that really need protection, the vulnerable inside those homes that are controlled potentially perimeters, as opposed to locking all of us down? So that was the first question. And the second thing that happened, there were a bunch of serological studies, and basically people looking at antibodies and seeing how many of us have had COVID. And a bunch of studies came out saying that infection rate in various jurisdictions around the world was about 20 times cases. Stanford came out in May and said that infection rate is 50 times cases. So in the United States, for every person that's walking around that we've diagnosed with COVID, there's another 50 people with COVID that we haven't diagnosed. I felt that was wonderful news, because you apply basic fraction and you realize that all the metrics that you're worried about, like ICUs, like mortality, like hospitalization, are actually 50 times lower than we thought. So I pointed that out as well, and on went the debate as to where we'll go from here. So to your question, Elliot, in good faith, I would suggest to you that I have worked, I've voiced my opinion intelligently at almost every caucus meeting. I felt that there was no other recourse when I wrote my letter in mid-January.
That's a very interesting response, because that's something that everyone wanted to know. Like, in terms of, was this the breaking point for you? And were you, last thing before we move on to the more of the discussion portion, were you the only one who had those views, or were there other members? You don't have to name names, obviously, but were there other members of caucus that shared your views?
I think it's generally known. So first of all, I'll respect my friend's confidentiality.
Yep.
And I still have a lot of wonderful friends and among my former colleagues. It is generally known from various media reports that there is dissent within the Progressive Conservative Caucus on the question of our COVID strategy. So to answer your question, yes. And look, in short, what we basically said is we need to consider the consequences of our decisions and weigh them against COVID. And so you cited some important statistics. For instance, I cited a tsunami of cancer in my letter. And this is Dr. Keith Stewart, who is the director at Princess Margaret Hospital. We learned just 3 days ago in an article that initially appeared in QP Briefing that in 2020, the province performed 1 million cancer screenings less than it did in 2019. That is an astonishing piece of news, right? Health is health. And you have to factor in the potential. And I speak to an ER physician who told me he never diagnosed this many late cancers in his ER. And those are also late, so the prospect of recovery is slower. I cited, maybe just one more, I cited overdose, right? Because we know that mental health, we have a mental health collapse. People are at home, they're depressed, they're lonely, and they're bored, and they're looking for an escape and alteration of their reality. I had a personal experience. I had a friend who reached out to me, a friend who's been on the wagon, I would call, for 15 years, and he said, Roman, I relapsed during the pandemic. So, City of Toronto, for instance, we learned from the coroner that year over year, drug overdoses in the City of Toronto alone are up 67%. So you look at the delta, you look at the change, and you say, okay, and you also look at the nature of the deaths. So young people, a much greater younger population, and all lives are equal. That is not to say, God forbid, that we want to give up on any life. I was saying that we need to focus protection in group homes where there is a problem, and instead not locking up healthy people, something we've never done before, and thereby making them sick, which is why I still insist that the best thing we can do for the health of Ontarians is to lift the lockdown.
Okay, so you obviously stand by your position. What do you ladies think about that in terms of, are the lockdowns worth it? Should we be lifting them? Do you support Roman in this, or do you think that Ford is doing the right thing? Christina.
I think back to when we first talked about the pandemic, and I was never a big fan of Doug Ford, and he kind of turned it around for me, and I thought he was handling it very well at the beginning. I thought he was taking it seriously, as he should. I definitely think there's been some bumps in the road at this point. Just an example, saying that we are going into another lockdown on December 26th, but he announced it about, I think, a week or two beforehand, which I thought was a bit careless. It seems...
and he originally said it would be the 24th, and then he said, okay, 26th to allow people to do their shopping.
And is that the... shopping? Is this? It's just there's a lot. I don't think that was a smart move. You're basically saying, hey guys, you have 2 weeks to break all the rules, and then 26th comes, and you have to now be back under all these rules, back under this lockdown. So I'm not loving how he's handling it now. But just hearing you speak, Roman, everything you say is like. It's devastating to think about the health of other people being almost swept under the rug in order to, keep beds open for potential COVID patients, which I understand that we need to have room for these people because they can get severely ill. But if it means that people with cancer and serious illnesses are having treatments delayed or are being diagnosed late, that's unacceptable to me. This is not a country where we let that happen to our citizens, and it's heartbreaking, to think about it from that perspective. And in terms of mental health,
you're big on mental health.
Yeah, and I've seen like personal, very close to me, like people having. Not just being sad, I've seen psychological breaks, psychosis, people being put into disturbed states of mind that I genuinely think have been triggered by this pandemic. It's not, I don't think it's very common for like one individual to have seen as many psychotic breaks in such a short period of time as I have, it has to be the pandemic. And I mean, these individuals can also, like, these individuals probably see it that way as well, but it's having these devastating effects on mental health too. And I think I've said this before, but I think when we come out of this pandemic, whenever that is, that we are going to be dealing with more mental illness and mental health crises than we are people who have died or become ill with COVID. There's going to be far more people who come out of this pandemic mentally ill than having suffered from COVID, which is awful. And well, like you said, people are healthy and they're being forced to stay at home, and it's making them sick, which is terrible.
Well, I do want to push back on you for a second, because the last time we spoke about this, you advocated for keeping the kids at home when they wanted to reopen schools. Now, people would say that that's very damaging to their mental health. So do you still think that kids should be kept at home and doing online learning?
I don't want to say my opinion has entirely changed. I think that we have to be careful with, reopening. We have to be careful to not put people at risk. We know that children are less likely to become severely ill with COVID. It's basically unheard of. And so I'm not going to say my opinion's entirely changed. My mother is a teacher. She's going to work every day with students. They have all the safety protocols in place, but I think that from a mental health perspective, it's so hard because I want to keep everyone safe from COVID, but I also want to keep everyone safe from mental illness or loneliness.
Or bankruptcy too.
Oh, that too. I mean, so it puts you in such a hard place, because I don't want to see people become ill with this virus, but I don't want to see healthy people and children, having their childhood these are important years of their lives that are being taken away from them by this pandemic, which is awful. Like, think about us at that age and how important being with your friends and going to school and having school concerts and assemblies, whatever it might be, those were so important. And kids don't get those important, we've had a year now that's been completely lost.
May I just jump in and respond to Christina? Just on a couple of issues that you raised. In terms of the unintended toll of the health mitigation measures, only in the last couple of weeks we're starting to really understand them better. And in fact, I cited a bunch of statistics in my letter. But one remarkable figure we learned over the course of this weekend, and in fact was first cited to me by Minister Christine Elliott in the House during question period on Thursday, is that the province of Ontario has postponed more than 250,000 surgeries. But 250,000 surgeries were not performed because of COVID mitigation measures. And when we say non-essential, some of them were cancer procedures, a lot of them were cardio procedures, and this is an astonishing number. We now learn that making up this backlog is almost, the word used in the CTV article is almost impossible. And so that is now regretfully one of the legacies of what has transpired. With respect to mental health, so it's important. My letter, if you actually look at my letter, there is only one line in a 2-page legal-sized letter on the economy and jobs. It was mostly about health and mental health, with specifically a section on children. Canadians, early on, we realized that suicidal ideation among Canadians was very, very high. CMHA came out with a study saying that among Canadian adults, suicidal ideation, so thoughts or feelings of suicide, have quadrupled from 2.5% to 10%. Among young people, Canadians ages 19 to 35, 20% were feeling suicidal ideation. That is a remarkable number. And Christina, I want to try and differentiate between something you said and something I feel, is that we can't blame the pandemic on this. It's not because of the pandemic that people are losing their mind at home. it's not because people are dying, God forbid, in long-term care homes that young people and little kids are experiencing these breakdowns. It's because they're locked down at home that they're experiencing them. And finally, I'll conclude on the children. One of the greatest motivators behind my letter, if I may have a copy of that, I'll copy of page 2, was children. And I'd like to read it to you. It's very short. Heading, Children. The lockdown is having a catastrophic effect on Ontario's children. Constituents tell me that their children develop anxiety. We're scaring children even though they're 100% safe. The government should also follow sick kids' advice against masking kids in schools. The crisis is in LTC homes, not schools. Premier, we should stop scaring children. This generation of kids will grow up with an anxiety disorder and will be afraid of normal life. Kids need to be kids again, back in school with their friends. They should not believe that coming close to another child may result in someone's death. It's false and unwarranted. We are raising a generation of children that thinks that because they're sitting next to another child or hanging out with another child, that someone might die. I met with friends today, their parents, and they tell me about what's happening to their child in grade 7. They're sitting behind a plexiglass in their desk. Mm-hmm. They're not allowed to speak during their lunch. They come out to the playground where their cohort, their class of 17, is in a drawn-up square. They cannot leave the square. And within each one of those squares, they have to physically distance from one another. And the teacher has a stick, a 2-meter stick, that he uses to measure the distance between children. And if they don't physically distance, then they're asked to go back into the school. This is happening inside a Toronto Catholic District School Board school. So shame on whoever is allowing for this to happen, that a year later, now that we understand that this is a completely different virus than they thought it was in March and April, that we're still inflicting this catastrophe on our children.
Well, I want to go to Anna, but just to push back on that a little bit, people are getting the virus at schools. And when the schools reopened back in September, there were about 7,000 cases attributed to schools across the province because of, you can't blame the kids for having the virus, but with all of this interaction, the problem is that when you allow one group of people to interact with each other and not another, right? But Anna, what do you think about these lockdowns? Were they worth it? And do you agree with Roman? Do you agree or do you disagree? What do you think?
I think that in the beginning it could be understandable until a certain extent. But right now, and I'm going to talk about my case, I live in an apartment and now the manager of my apartment believes that she has authorization to let people, she literally sent us a letter saying that you cannot let anyone on your apartment. And if you let people in, security will stop them. As simple as that. That's a violation of property rights.
It's interesting because last time, on the last episode we talked about it, you said you could have a limited number of people. So now they're saying
no, there's 0. Exactly. So basically the only way that you can get someone if you are having like an essential service that you need to get like mandatory. Mm-hmm. And
like a caregiver.
Exactly. That's the only way. And that's what scares me about the lockdown. I also come from a country that is very authoritarian, not as the Soviet Union, but very close, very communist too. And the reality is when I see governments like exceeding in their laws and the application of these laws, there's something that triggers me. I have to admit it. Like, for example, these kind of situations where I can feel that people are ruling even over the space that I'm paying for is very frustrating. And the thing is that I try to send her a letter. I try to talk to security, and no, because the government is mandating this. Period. So that's the answer they gave to me. And another thing that I also find quite concerning is small businesses. I mentioned that in the last episode. And every time I talk to I live in around Bay Street. So every time I talk to someone that belongs to has a business that has been impacted by this, I can see what they say and they're desperate. They are like, I'm not getting customers. I'm barely getting anyone. They are literally operating in fear because they think that they are going to be shut down again.
So are you more worried about the businesses, or are you more worried about the psychological effect?
Everything links to each other. When you feel that your sustainability, that your life, financial life is being impacted, your mental health will come next. That's a reality.
There's a lot of studies linking, in fact, economic well-being to social and mental health well-being. There's no question. The effect on small business and business generally cannot even be measured. I cited a study this morning from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. 51% of Canadian businesses don't know, the answer was they don't know how much longer they can sustain the current course before bankruptcy or closure. The numbers are simply staggering. And we're not just talking about the small business and the family that has their life savings and now borrowed and remortgaged their future and savings to sustain it. It's all their employees as well. And it's all their employees and their families. Each small business has an average of 30 to 50 suppliers. It's their suppliers and their employees and their families. So the domino effect here is masterful. But what's more important is that we're making this weighing exercise as if it's small business versus COVID. But that's not the right framework, because we have not seen any meaningful evidence for the proposition that there's actually transmission within small business, very little. And I invite you to look at various statistics, specifically Canada's weekly epidemiological report that attributes deaths to outbreaks and the specific settings of those outbreaks. And you will see that from all the settings, dining, retail, personal care, and account for 3 deaths resulting from outbreaks in all of those settings in all of Canada. 3. And you compare that to 12,000 in long-term care from outbreaks, and you really understand the magnitude of this. So I resent the fact that for some reason we're saying it's either health or business. No. I think that if we're engaging in an extraordinary measure of closing down society or closing down business or completely altering people's livelihood, then it's on public health to prove their case, to show cause that this is actually makes sense, and no one can dispute that they have not.
Well, one thing that stands out to me personally, and I've mentioned this on the show, is gyms, right? So I've started going to the gym last year, and 3 weeks in, the pandemic started, and I stopped. And I said, maybe that's a sign I should stop. But the gym's closed, and the gyms, like you said, they account for very little cases. The only major headline was a gym in Hamilton, a spin cycle gym that caused over 100 cases, and they used that as the trademark to say, well, gyms are unsafe, when gyms are safe. People are wearing masks, people are social distancing, they're in their own area, even in classes, right? And they've scaled it down. But I want to go back to let's actually talk about the future, because everybody wants this pandemic to be over, and one of the ways that public health is telling us that this will be over, and at the same time saying that it still won't be over, is vaccines. Now, we did conduct a poll on Instagram asking our audience. What was the question that we asked our audience?
So we asked them if they would get the COVID-19 vaccine. And the results we got were 69% of the votes said yes, they would get the vaccine, and 32% of the votes said no, they would not get the vaccine.
I think it's pretty interesting that more people have said that they would, or they have gotten or would get the vaccine, because, and it's not based on the results, it's not a left and right issue. I mean, there are people on the left and people on the right who said both things. I'm going to open up the question to you both. Would you take the vaccine?
Yes.
Yes.
And I also just wanted to say that I think if you asked this question a couple of months ago, maybe our results would have been switched the other way around. I think that with time and with more research and evidence, people are maybe more confident in getting these vaccines. I think that's why we're maybe seeing more people saying yes. But for me personally, yes, I would get the vaccine.
Anna?
Actually, I would have said yes immediately because I'm really annoyed by the entire situation. I want to travel. But the reality is I was reading today an article, and not only this article, like AstraZeneca is right now causing like, there is some concerns that has been raised by certain European states that is having
it's causing blood clots.
Exactly. And
That's a specific one, though, no?
Yeah.
It is a specific one.
and the Canadian government is like, no, it's gonna be fine. But honestly, I don't trust that much. I prefer to wait.
And that's the thing, Canada's, last time I checked, 65th on the list of vaccine rollout, and yet so many countries are saying that this vaccine is a problem, and Canada is saying it's not a problem, and they've actually expanded its use to people at 60 plus instead of just 80 plus. So based on that, has your mind changed about getting the vaccine?
I think I will get it eventually, but if it's the one that they will start roll out, because as far as I learned, they are using the Pfizer one on people that are 65 and older. So I don't know if the AstraZeneca is the one that is going to be placed on people who are like our age.
I thought they were saying that the AstraZeneca one was, I think, like now it's being said that it's better for 65 and up, or it's that they're, I'm not exactly sure. I don't listen to me.
Roman, would you take the vaccine?
Yes. So
You would?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's shown efficacy, and other than AstraZeneca, and assuming that is fairly documented, we haven't seen much problematic symptomatology resulting. However, I would caution that under no circumstances should we force people into a vaccine, directly or indirectly. And that is a very important point to make. And indirectly also means that we can't coerce them by denying them normal life and access to what we would expect, whether it's public transportation or the library or school or work, on the basis of the fact that they opted not to engage in a certain medical procedure. That is a democratic right that we must respect. And
yeah, go ahead.
If I may, and then there's another point on the vaccine, and I'll repeat again that I will take the vaccine. But we have to determine, and we have to be fair about whether a vaccine is actually a viable exit strategy. We know that this coronavirus, it mutates, and there's a UK study finding that there's already more than 4,000 mutations of COVID-19. And so we know that there are some strains of COVID that are less susceptible to the vaccine. The South African variant, the Brazilian variant, and there will be many other variants. Moderna came out on January 12 in Forbes magazine and said, our shot is only good for a year. Pfizer came out maybe 6 weeks ago and said, we probably need a third booster shot. So the question is, given the variants, given the fact that the formula may need to change, given the fact that the virus ever evolves, whether in fact we can count on the fact that the vaccine is our way out of this. And that is not entirely certain right now, which is why I asked the government House leader during question period, when are we going to come out of this? Is this going to be when we get Moderna's new formula? Is it going to be when we get the Pfizer booster shot? We want some sort of certainty too. It's important for our mental health, for planning for life. Or maybe it's a decision that we need to make right now. If we know that some variants are not going to be caught by the vaccine, then we got to reconsider now.
And you touched on several points that I want to get to. Let's start with the fact that you said that you don't think people should be forced to take it. Obviously, we know your answer on that. Christina, Anna, do you think employers should be allowed to enforce vaccines on their employees, or that the government should be allowed to force it on the citizens? Anna?
I don't think it should be enforced, but I think they will apply certain measures. For example, the yellow fever vaccine is an example of that. I think that's what is going to happen with COVID in the future, and is that countries, in order to allow for tourists, they're going to be like, show me that you have the COVID vaccine.
And that goes to another thing someone just brought up. They want to know about vaccine passports like they have in Israel, right? Do you think that something like that is going to happen? We're going to go to Christina and then to Roman.
I think...
And do you support it?
I think it's possible, and I don't really know where I stand on terms of whether or not I support it, because I do believe in enforcing vaccinations. I understand that when we, start to tell people that they need to have this vaccine or else they can't participate in society, we are treading in a dangerous territory, and it's an infringement on individual rights. But I will say that we've seen there be enforcement of vaccines. Just an example, I remember in elementary school being sent home with a letter every now and then saying that we needed to send in an updated
proof of vaccination,
right, or else you would be suspended until that vaccination was up to date.
So what differentiates that from the COVID vaccine? Like
that's
I believe
mean.
chickenpox is one that you need to have.
The differentiation is actually the other way around. And I'll preface my answer again by saying that I will take the vaccine.
Yep.
Even though I don't believe that we should force anyone onto it. But we have an exemption for school children who don't want to take the vaccine. Their parents have to sign an affidavit, and I believe they have to take a 1-hour course, and then a child can be exempt in school. Now, I don't believe it's a good idea. I believe that we should vaccinate children. But, we have a common law principle that goes back maybe 200, 250 years, that we cannot apply force without consent, and that includes medical procedure. It's called a medical battery.
Okay.
And
can you expand on what that is?
Yeah, it means that when I force you into a medical procedure that you do not want.
It's almost like assault.
It is assault. It has always been illegal. And the question is, do we believe that we're now facing a situation with COVID that would require this extraordinary remedy to be exercised? Now that we know where the deaths are concentrated, now that we know that more than 80% who tragically die from this virus are over the age of 80. In fact, mortality is about 85. It's actually older than life expectancy in Canada. Should we be forcing folks potentially engaging in medical battery, even though we know that 80% of those that die, regretfully, are in congregate homes? And so I'm saying, while I will take the vaccine, I do not believe that we should be rewriting 200 years of rule of law to fit a narrative that I believe has legitimately been debunked.
And I just to add to it, I like I said, I don't really know where I stand on the forcing people to get vaccines, because it's a great point about the medical battery. I will say that I understand the caution around the vaccine. Typically we don't see vaccines being turned around this quickly. Usually it takes more time to develop them, but that doesn't mean that I don't trust it. I do have a lot of faith in medicine and science and vaccinations. We've seen vaccines, eliminate illnesses. We eradicated smallpox with vaccines. So there is evidence that that vaccines make a difference and they're important. One thing I will say is that there should be, I'm sure that this will be a thing, but exemptions from vaccines. If you have a medical condition that makes you high risk for getting this vaccine, if you have allergies to the vaccine,
that's something that people said. If you have allergies, don't take the vaccine.
So health experts have specifically said if you have vaccines to the ingredients or if you have allergies to the ingredients in the vaccines, don't take it, because it could harm you. And I am somebody who has I am allergic to everything there is. Not typically with medicine or food, but I don't know, and if I would be awful to, somebody who has an allergy to every vaccine and can't get vaccinated, and then to tell them, oh, you can't come into my business because only vaccinated individuals can come into my business, then that's also a problem.
If I may, you raise a very, very important issue, which is application of the law. And we have seen, for instance, with some of the mask mandates, that they're not being properly enforced, in that there are stores that would not potentially honor an exemption. I'm a member of the Legislative Assembly, The Legislative Assembly does not have an exemption for MPPs from the mask. I have a friend who has asthma, and she is not exempt from wearing the mask.
I have severe, I have severe asthma, and I can understand the just to speak to that. I mean, everybody's different.
What I'm saying is that we have not seen a fair application of the mask bylaw, and so there's reason to be concerned that we're not going to see legitimate application of the way that the vaccine mandate, if there is one, is going to be applied. And so people that are legitimately unable to take the vaccine because they may have a protein allergy will then be cut off from society. That they will not enjoy privilege of travel, that they will potentially be trapped, and their mobility rights will not be respected. Hopefully they're still going to be able to enter a public library. So this is a very slippery slope, and these are decisions that we have to be very, very judicious about. And the best thing to do is to go back to number one, first principles. How did we get here? Why am I here? Why is Anna here? Why did your parents come to this country? Because we knew that the state was probably not going to do something to us against our will, among other things. And the second thing, and this goes back to your question about the Soviet Union and Anna's suggestion with respect to the communist regime. Here's one thing I find in common, in addition to like the lines to the liquor store. It's the fact that so much of what we do is predicated on a false narrative. That's really how you define a communist regime, is that they're telling you something that is utterly not true. And you know it's not true. In fact, everyone knows it's not true. But they still continue to pretend that it's true. And it's on the basis of that false narrative that we make these extraordinary decisions, and this is no exception. And to predicate, and again, I will take the vaccine, but because, we don't want to discuss it, but to predicate a mandate on a narrative that may not entirely be accurate, and that is the fear and risk of the virus at large, it's probably not a good thing to do.
Well, again, as people know, my parents also come from Soviet Union, and I know they have experienced what it's like to be told something that's not true. But, doctors do say that wearing masks and the lockdowns are working. Do you guys agree that there's some merit to it, or is it completely false? Anna?
I think that there is some merit in wearing masks. However, I cannot, there is no way to say it doesn't work 100%. Mm-hmm. That's a reality, and to be honest, it's something that yes, we had to live with, and yeah, I think that we can just do like wearing the mask, we can use the hand sanitizers, but there's no 100% answer that this is going to prevent me from getting this illness. Like there are people, for example, getting COVID in flights. And to be honest with you, I have taken a flight during the last summer, and you're wearing the mask basically during the entire flight. Mm-hmm. So what is going on there?
And people, government officials have said that even if you get the vaccine, you still have to social distance, you still have to wear masks. And that being the case, why would...
That is what terrifies me.
Well, what's the point?
You give us the vaccine and then we don't even get the
freedom back.
Freedom.
Exactly.
Life, you don't get your life back.
And I can't even tell you, like, now that we've been doing this for a year, how much I miss normal life. And how hard, just from a personal perspective, how I struggle with an anxiety disorder and depression. And this has been one of the hardest things on me. And I've gone through, a lot of bad, my mental health. I've gone through episodes where it's been worse. And this is probably like the worst it's ever been consistently. And it's, I'm tired of it. I would like to go back to normal, but it does terrify me that, if I do get vaccinated, I do the full, 3 vaccines, whatever it is that you have to get, and I'm still going to have to put a mask on. I'm still going to have to, we're all like whatever.
Limit.
Yeah,
Minute.
we're six. I said 6 meters in the email I sent to your assistant, but I meant 6 feet.
Yeah.
But we're all safe here. Just
Yeah, we're all 6 feet apart, but I would love to, like Anna came through the door and we'd like had our little reunion after not seeing each other for months, but I couldn't hug her, we had to stay apart. There's so many little things about,
It's good to at least be able to talk about this. Because up until a couple of months ago, such discussion would not be tolerated.
yeah.
Parents were afraid to tell other parents that their child is depressed because that would make them grandma killers. What, don't you understand COVID? What, are you insensitive? Don't you understand the narrative? Do you need to be canceled?
Police mentality.
This is new for Canada too. We have never experienced anything like this. We're compassionate people. We're kind and tolerant and accepting. And we have turned into, we've seen so many people turn into bullies. I call them COVID bullies.
And you just brought up something that was mentioned earlier in our show by Kobe in the comments. He said, how does Roman and the panelists feel that there is the narrative that if you're not for lockdowns, that you're considered anti-science, thinking that this pandemic is a scam?
So, first of all, and this specifically goes to my letter, of course I recognize that COVID is a real infection.
Yeah.
In fact, I invite everyone to learn more about COVID and its odd ideations like diabetes, or folks that are potentially overweight, or how this is a respiratory virus that can attack different parts of the body. But so no one denies that. But the question is predicated on a false assumption. My letter was not about business and jobs. My letter was about health and mental health. In fact, I make the argument that our position, the anti-lockdown position, pointing to the cancer rates and the cancelled surgeries and the mental health issues and a host of other issues, we're the humanist ones. I wrote the letter not to compromise lives. I wrote the letter to save human lives. So this division that was created by this politically correct cancel culture should come to an end, and we should have courage to speak out against it. We have come to this country, or our parents have come to this country, because we believe that we had an inherent right to say no to government, and we still do. And that includes the bureaucrats, the unelected bureaucrats, who have not seen a live patient in 20 years. The very same people that want to prevent the consumption of sugary drinks are now reordering life, thinking that kids will not hang out, thinking that little children are not going to slobber over each other, or that young adults are not going to date and should not date.
And that's the thing. That's, about having these discussions. That's the point of this show, is to have discussions about these issues. So that's why the question came up, because you said that people weren't having these discussions. Anna, what do you think? Why do you think that people say that? It's the same thing as on the ones, each side uses science when it benefits them, right? So
I totally believe that people, they feel when they see that other people are continuing living their lives, they want to stop them from doing that. For example, if you have a neighbor that has been very strict on his own lockdown, if they see that you are having maybe a couple of friends, you don't need to even have a big party, they can even call the police on you. And why? Because they don't like that, because they feel like internally there is a feeling of injustice and envy at the same time.
I was just going to say, I feel like so much of it is like, it's envy. It's your neighbors going, well, I don't have people over. I'm following the rules.
Should she have it?
It's a police mentality.
You think it gives people the moral authority to basically do that?
Of
Like
course.
they feel morally superior from doing that?
Of course, because the government is backing you up. The government is telling you to follow
It's telling
these
you,
laws.
yeah,
Exactly.
they're giving you hotlines to call if you see.
To snitch.
Literally. And
I saw a video in Quebec, and that impacted me
Oh.
because there was this
I know which one
person
you're talking
celebrating, I think it was New Year's Eve or Christmas
Yep.
Eve, I don't remember, and the police came and they brutally removed them from home. Like the woman that they removed, she didn't have shoes and she was
Yeah.
standing on the snow.
It was freezing. And
Exactly. Like, why would you do that? And the worst part is that they were elders living in their house, Maybe they felt alone. Maybe they wanted company during the holidays. It was necessary the use of force. I don't agree.
Elliot, this is what Anna's describing is completely un-Canadian. and it's uncivilized. And I pray that once this ends, somehow, that we will have the courage to stand up. I call this standing up to COVID bullies and say, no, this is not how we behave towards one another. But I really don't. I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to address your last question with respect to, science and lockdown. The whole premise of science is that it's there to be questioned. There is no science. Science is there to be discovered. Science evolves. Science is questioning science.
But in science, there are answers, right?
But the point is, the science evolves all the time.
Yeah.
We learn all the time. So what is science at this moment is not what science is in the next moment. And it's entirely okay to be questioning science. That is, in fact, it's called the scientific inquiry. It's to question science. So it's okay for me to question, why are we still in second lockdown and it's so efficacious and we're already talking about a third lockdown?
Yeah.
Or did we save any lives? Lives were taken away in long-term care and retirement homes prior to this. And second wave was even deadlier. So it's not as if we learned anything or have magically improved ourselves. So we should be able to be asking all of those questions. And to say that by questioning lockdowns, you're questioning science, you're implying that lockdowns are good science, and we haven't seen good science. In fact, we've seen the opposite science to suggest that lockdowns is bad science.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I'm not here to say what is and what isn't right. It's just, Kobe and many others have asked that question in terms of what do you say to people who say that you're questioning science? And you bring up a good point that we should be asking questions about science, and we should be
Everything should
debating.
be questioned
in
life,
For every public health official, there are dozens of doctors out there that saying that lockdowns are deadly. 600 U.S. doctors wrote in May to former president that that lockdowns are a mass casualty event. We had 4 very public letters to Canadian premiers, initially in the Post, then in the Globe, and then in the Star, and then the Globe, and then finally in the Sun, with doctors publicly saying, please find a balanced approach instead of locking everyone down indiscriminately.
But to clarify, though, do you agree on some aspects that masks help, or do you agree that the first lockdown was useful, or do you think nobody should have been locked down at all?
We now understand that there's no efficacy to lockdowns, because it's not about how many cases of COVID, it's who gets COVID. Okay, let me give you a quick scenario. When we went to the stay-at-home order on December 26th, Ontario had about 160,000 cumulative cases of COVID. Today we have about 330,000, 340,000. So we doubled. We have had as many cases of COVID in the last 2 months as we did in the last 2.5 months as we did in the preceding 7.5 months. The hospitals did not get overwhelmed. Mortality did not see a deviation. Why? Because it became abundantly clear that there's no functional relationship. There is no functional relationship between cases and ICUs and hospitalizations. If the 4 of us in this room get COVID, and folks like us get COVID, 100,000 of us, God forbid, get COVID, hospitals are not going to move an inch, probably. But if 200 seniors in a long-term care home get COVID, then God forbid, half of them are going to pass away. Is this not a material distinction that we have to make? So the fact that we're sitting here is not going to change the fact that we don't have good infection protocol in place in retirement homes and in long-term care homes, and that it only takes one worker, who, by the way, works in multiple homes, because that's still allowed, agency work.
That's how a lot of people got it.
Who's going to bring in COVID from another home, and 50 to 100 people are regretfully going to die. The fact that we're not unable to lead a normal life and are getting sick because we're locked down is not going to change that. So maybe we're doing something wrong, and at least we're talking about this now.
Anna, what do you think? Do you agree with Roman? Do you think that... do you agree with Roman? Do you disagree?
No, I actually agree with him in what he said. And something that I mentioned in the last episode about the lockdown was the Swedish strategy. And is that in the case of Sweden, they basically took the preventive measures on elders and people that could have like immunocompromised system. And they led a certain, like most of the population was living a normal life.
Yeah.
Most of business were running. Most of people were still, they certainly, if the case increases, they actually, became more strict. But more than that, it was completely normal. And honestly, I think that Canada has become too excessive. I see my friends living abroad and they are not living the life that we are living. I actually know cases of Canadians that have decided to move for many months to South America because they find more freedom there, when it's usually the other way around. So that doesn't make sense at all, people. And yeah, exactly, like that is madness.
We're the most locked down jurisdiction probably in the world, definitely in North America.
Yeah, Toronto is actually second
in
to
the
LA.
whole Americas, I would say.
Well, Toronto is second to LA in the number of days that indoor dining has been banned for during the entire pandemic, and it's a bunch of states, a bunch of cities in California, some in New York, and a lot in Canada. But before we get to the future, which is the last thing, Christina, you unlike Roman and Anna, you did advocate for a lockdown, and you really said that it helped. Do you still think that way, or do you or has your mind changed?
Well, obviously, with time, my mind has changed. I think the initial lockdown that we did last year, I think we did see evidence of cases going down, and I still stick by that. I think that initial lockdown was a good call, and I think we did see improvements. However, now we've got all these variants. We have non-essential workers providing curbside pickup. Malls have just reopened. So there's all these businesses and people interacting with each other, but we're being told to stay away from people. Yet all these businesses are filled with people, and schools are filled with people. And to me, at this point, the lockdown seems, I don't want to say entirely pointless, but to some extent, like you're saying, stay at home, don't go anywhere, stay 6 feet apart, but you can also go pick up items from another person, curbside pickup.
Yeah.
You can also go to a Walmart that has an 1,000-person capacity. You can also be a teacher or a student. You can go to school and interact with other people, but you have to stay home and stay away from people. And not, it's almost like,
and that's the thing. It's like you can do this, but you can't do that. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask, which was, but we obviously don't have time for it, which was that, what do you think of the advertisements by the government, which are saying stay home unless absolutely necessary, unless you have to do this, unless you have to do that, unless you have to do this, and unless you have to do that. So why would I stay at home? I have to do all the regular things.
Well, at the very least, I would ask the government to keep its own advice. If you actually look at their social media, they're all out and about doing, visiting places. And
one of your former colleagues, Rod Phillips, decided to take a vacation.
Must be nice.
And he actually faked being at home so people wouldn't know.
Listen, if I wrote my letter from St. Bart's, I wouldn't be. But in reality, we're not seeing a lot of common sense. When I was a young lawyer, a mentor taught me that if it doesn't make sense, it's probably not true. And that served me pretty well in my career. And to suggest that, there's a virus when I'm standing up in a restaurant, but not when I'm sitting down.
Yeah.
Or to suggest that I can have my, you can invite a cleaner over to your home, but not your mom or your sibling.
Yeah.
To suggest that agency workers can go from a home to a home, but a best friend cannot see their grandma in a hospital or a retirement home. That makes no sense. And we should do better. And we should put people first, not fear of COVID that should have long time been moderated by now. We haven't been doing that.
So that brings us to the end. What is the future of the pandemic? How is it going to be over? And what should we be doing to end it? Let's start with you, Roman.
So I had a exit plan proposed to the Premier in my letter. 4-point plan. Number 1, secure long-term care home. Identify where the problem is, secure it. Number 2, if you need hospital capacity, Not that we needed hospital capacity. We have like this field hospital in Burlington and St. Joseph Brent. It's been empty. It's never been used. But if we needed, build it. Finally, I'm hearing that we're building 2 hospitals in the GTA now, field hospitals.
Yep, one's at Sunnybrook.
Yeah, about a year too late for some reason. Yeah. 3, be fair about the narrative. We know who's dying from this and who isn't. And number 4, lift the lockdown. Let people live again. Let people go back to work, because that is essential for their health, and give them their health care back too, because we have a major loss of health care at the expense of COVID fear. And how do we end it? Where do we go from here? The best thing we can do is cut our losses right away. The premier is continuing this against the horror that we're seeing right now. Everybody understands that the lockdown is a catastrophe. In my view, almost everyone. Mm-hmm. And yet this continues because of politics. We need to be honest with ourselves. This is a mistake. It has been a mistake. Yes, we have suffered and we've invested a lot, but it's better to stop the bleeding now. Stop it.
Anna, how do you feel about that, about Roman's 4-point plan? And when do you feel this thing is going to be over?
I'm not optimistic about it, especially because of what we mentioned about the vaccine. I think we're going to get the vaccine, and then the government is going to say, like, yeah, but that's not the solution. We need to continue in another lockdown for a certain period of time. That is not going to be the certain period of time, because they're going to extend it, probably.
We're now officially in a 3rd wave.
And yeah. Honestly, it's going to be a never-ending thing until I don't know what needs to be done, if people needs to change their mind, if people needs to say, it's enough. But the reality is that the government is overly cautious, and they are being using that in order to push for this longer and longer. And I think they're going to continue doing that.
Yeah, it's going to end after we, headlines will say Canada is entering the 10th wave. That's maybe when we'll see some progress. But I'm not optimistic either. I remember this time last year thinking that by the fall we would be out of it. Yeah. We would be back to normal life. And now here we are, March 2021, and it honestly does not look. Things aren't looking up. The positivity I once had about, being free within a few months, now at this point I'm like, maybe I'll be lucky if it's a few years. Like I'm.
Some people are saying this is gonna drag on till 2025.
But I think what's gonna happen is there's gonna be some sort of a rebellion. I do. I think that people are gonna get fed up, especially young people. Who are not living normal lives, not getting to do all the things that their parents got to do. And I think we're going to see people basically say F it. And
well, don't you think that the rebellion has started and people like Roman are standing up and saying, listen, this is not right?
Of course. And I just mean to a larger extent, I think people right now would love to rebel, but there's all these threats of the law, and your neighbors calling the cops on you for breaking the rules. So I think
also it's the media. If you try to rebel, if you try to protest, they also come and tell, no, these people, they're extremists. They're just crazy because they don't believe.
Your face is going to be plastered online.
Exactly.
You're going to be made a fool of online. People are going to drag you for breaking the rules. So it's hard.
So you have to be, couple of points, very important. You have to be sensible. We have to be moderate, and we have to be fair about the narrative. And that's what I try to do, instead of wandering off places, to just simply compare the facts and rationalize them and have a discussion about them. But I very much caution against this thinking of a rebellion. We are a rule of law country, and that sustains us. But that cuts both ways. Right? I would never encourage civil disobedience as a lawyer, as a legislator. I would never do that. The problem is people are thinking, if the state is going to invade my rights and force me into vaccine, again, I will take the vaccine. But if someone says, I don't want the vaccine, and the state forces them, and that in and of itself may be illegal to force them, then that loss of rights may trigger civil disobedience.
But do you think
so it's important that we don't go the other way either, that the citizens respect the rule of law, and the government respects the rule of law.
But do you think that your letter is in a sense a rebellion, not necessarily a violent one, but just a rebellion in the sense of we don't agree with this and
Elliot,
we want to change?
No, that's a conversation. What you just described when you say, I don't agree with this and I want to change, that's a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you're asking whether someone at this table agrees with someone else or not. That's not a rebellion. I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying that we have, as a society, as a country, we have lived through difficult moments. This is another difficult moment.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of shutting down, and as Anna said, when you start dismissing people, calling their names, impugning their motives,
Mm-hmm.
no, we are allowed to be heard and we're allowed to be wrong.
Do you think, though, that, and this is, again, not saying what you did was right or wrong. I'm just saying that what happened to you was that you were dismissed and your concerns weren't listened to. So to a degree, like maybe it's a different word, maybe it's the language of rebellion, but do you think that when Christina says that there needs to be a rebellion, you don't...
Not that there needs to be, that there might be.
That there might be, but you don't think that it started?
No, I do think it started. I just mean to on a more not that people aren't rebelling in a serious way now. I just mean I think right now we're restricted and we're scared of acting of going against these bylaws that are in place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we're going to start to see people saying, I am not following these laws. You are not going to, you're not going to be ticketing me for seeing people. And I think we're going to see an increase in people basically going against these bylaws.
Well, I think that this has been an excellent discussion. Roman, you obviously gave a voice to so many people that didn't have a voice. And, I guess we quiver what to call it in the sense of whether it's a rebellion, whether it's a discussion, but you were one of the first people to, I guess, publicly make it so, right?
Yes.
And to this day, you mentioned earlier on the show, you're still proud of the decision you made and people have supported you through it. Do you think that the Ford government is going to get another term after this handling? Do you think that there's going to be change? Do you think that, especially if this pandemic is going to be for the next, let's say, 4 years?
I can't speak to politics, but I would say the following. You have to be living under a rock right now if you don't understand that the lockdown is imposing a remarkable catastrophe on Ontarians. And I believe that the Premier and Cabinet and MPPs understand that. And in spite of that, they're continuing to put us through that. I'm afraid that it's happening for political reasons, that if they were to lift the lockdown right now, they would have to admit a mistake, a potentially deadly mistake, and that would, in fact, destabilize them and would prevent them from a second majority. Whereas if they say, look, we've stumbled through this and kept cases low and now we're out, somehow they will. But that will come at a cost of ruining millions of lives that are being ruined right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so my appeal to them is they should stop. And my appeal to your viewers is that they should be unafraid to say how they feel, to discuss their issues. We've heard at this table today, I started a hashtag called My Lockdown Story.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has a lockdown story and the terrible things that have happened to them.
Yeah.
Their lockdown story matters and should be factored into our public decision making.
And on that point, we're going to end off. And on that particular point, we do agree with you in the sense that people need to have discussions. And that's the whole point of this show. That's what we've been doing for the last 5 years, 10 seasons. We've had these discussions that for some people might be uncomfortable, but they're needed. They're needed to have in such a climate. So that was our show for this week. Thank you to everyone that tuned in and that messaged us live. Roman, thank you so much for coming on the show and for giving us your perspective.
Thanks so much for having me.
We really appreciate it. Christina and Anna, it's been a pleasure as always. What was your first show back like, Christina?
Better than I could have ever dreamed.
Better?
Yeah.
Can't tell if you're lying through your teeth or not, but Anna, how do you feel?
One of my favorite shows, actually.
Great guest. Thank you for coming, Roman.
Thank you so much.
Very insightful. Definitely changed my mind on a couple of things too. So
Wow. See, and that's exactly what you've been trying to do. Having these discussions.
I just need to speak to another 6 million Ontarians now.
yeah.
Maybe
Well,
7.
you know what? If this show is open to those 6 million Ontarians, so we encourage.
If you want to watch.
We encourage 6 million
Let's share.
Ontarians to watch the show because we would truly appreciate it, especially with our last season. But a brand new episode of the Raben Report will be coming to you next week, same day, same time, same people. Have a good night, everyone.